adapting the message to changing times. And then I'll open it up to questions here in a minute. Here's an example of it, in terms of how we include things at sometimes and don't include them at others. Anybody recognize this? It was the service book and hymnal, the red book, the true hymnal. And does this look familiar? This is one we use now. And what's in between? This is the cranberry. And in between was the green book. The Evangelical Lutheran Book of Worship, also known as the Green Elbow, which got rid of most of the hymns harmonized by Johann Sebastian Bach. Let me read you a hymn from the service book and hymnal. Remember all the people who live in far-off lands, in strange and wondrous cities, or roam the desert sands, or farm the mountain pastures, or till the endless plains, where children wade through rice fields and watch the camel trains. Verse 2, some work in sultry forests, where apes swing to and fro. Some fish in mighty rivers, some hunt across the snow. Remember all God's children who yet have never heard the truth that comes from Jesus, the glory of His Word. It's not a bad hymn. It's about world missions. But what's the... Tell me a place in the world where children wade in rice fields and at the same time watch camel trains go by. Or some live in sultry forests where apes swing to and fro. What's that? That is based on the Tarzan movies. Again, this is from a hymnal that was produced in 58. Does it appear in the Green Evangelical Lutheran Book of Worship? No. Is it in the Cranberry? No. Why not? It's not bad, but we read that now and we say, oh my goodness. It's a naive kind of view of the world. And it doesn't speak to the kind of, we're in a church now where people regularly have traveled to Africa. And where we see Christians in Tanzania as fellow members of the body of Christ who speak to us as well. We don't see it as a place where we go to watch apes swinging to and fro, which really doesn't happen in Eastern Africa anyway. What I'm saying is it's not bad, it's just that is not a hymn that speaks to our outreach. Is it important for people to speak about Christ alone? Yes. But maybe we have to adapt the way we change, or the way we do it. I'm sorry, I don't mean to mock the hymn, I just think it reveals itself. You hear it and you're kind of uncomfortable, you say, that kind of makes me wince. I think there's one or two more slides. Oh, that's it. So what can we say about Ephesians? I will put it simply. I think you can make a case that Paul wrote Ephesians. I think it's more likely that one of his disciples did. Maybe the next generation or the generation that follows. I think Ephesians is written by someone who knew Romans very well and got it. Which is much better than I can say about 1st and 2nd Timothy. But got what Romans is about and was facing a church that was much more Gentile than Paul's congregations were, was much more sophisticated than Paul's original congregations were, and still this movement was growing. So the term I like to use, rather than Paul wrote it, Paul didn't, is the enduring apostolic voice continues in the letter to the Ephesians. And it speaks the truth. And I think that's the value of our congregational study and the strength of what we're about. So, yeah, I'm among those who say this is a disputed letter and probably Paul didn't write it, but whoever did knew Paul and was doing his best, or her best, to continue that apostolic voice into a changing time. That's what I would argue. I'll take questions, please.
So you still think it's a first century book?
Late first century, because you need to get into the... Paul is dead by 65.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're saying it is part of the early second century.
Well, I think it's part of the second or third generation. Yeah. And it doesn't have to go into the second century. It still could be late first. But I would argue Paul is gone. But these are people who are saying, you know, how do I continue? I would... the pastoral epistles I might push into the second century, early second century. 1 Peter I would put in the late first century. 2 Peter maybe later than that, or early second. But I would maybe put this in the 90s, 80s, 90s, about the time that the Gospels are being written. Yeah.
What I hear you saying is that in Ephesians that there isn't maybe time for brick and mortar for the temple or the cornerstone, whereas Paul, that's why he references the body as the temple of Christ.
Yeah,
is there that urgency issue? Why build a church?
Well, I didn't even get into the issue of church organizational structure. Philippians makes some reference to bishops, but other than that, Paul doesn't really talk about hierarchies. 1 Timothy is all about offices. You know, bishops, deacons, widows, which is kind of an anticipation of a women's diaconal organization, and presbyters, elders. You know, so we have all these offices. We don't have those in the undisputed letters of Paul. We get a little bit of concern for that, and right teaching in Ephesians and Colossians. Does that speak to your question? And time. You know, Paul doesn't think there's time. And in the undisputed letters of Paul, those 7, there is no abstract concept of the church. Capital T, capital C. Paul always talks about churches. And the Greek word is ecclesiae, gatherings. The collective word he uses is saints. You're all saints in your respective gatherings. But the concept of the church, which we get in the later, it isn't part of those early letters. You know, that's why you have a denomination called the Assemblies of God. I mean, they're getting their terminology right from Paul. Speak in tongues more than I do, but, you know, so they're trying to be biblical in their name.